Welcome to the MS&Me Radio Network. The broadcast shows are for informational and entertainment purposes only. They are not designed to provide listeners with specific personal, medical, or counseling advice. Individuals with a medical issue should always consult their healthcare provider. MS&Me is not responsible for content of individual shows. The views expressed by show hosts or their guests are their own. Enjoy the show.
I'm John Strum, and this is RealTalk MS. When it comes to new research, important news, pending legislation, there's a lot happening around the world that's going to impact families living with MS. So this week's podcast is kind of a news roundup that I hope will bring you up to speed on some of the things that you probably ought to know about. First and foremost, we need to talk about the tax bills that are in the process of being voted on in the United States Congress. I know that I talked about this last week, but this is a critically important issue if you live in the United States. And if you do live in the U.S., you need to pick up the phone and let your legislators know how either of these bills will affect families living with MS. First off, why are there two bills? Well, the House of Representatives has already passed their version of the Income Tax Act, and that version eliminates the tax deduction for medical expenses. And if you're living with MS and your health insurance isn't paying for all of your prescription drug expenses, your MRI expenses that you incur from follow-up visits to your neurologist, chances are pretty high that you're itemizing those expenses on your tax return because that is going to lower the amount of tax you owe each year. Well, the version of the tax bill that's been passed in the House eliminates that deduction and raises your taxes, potentially by a lot. The other tax bill is currently in the Senate. And this bill, as of now, it's expected to be voted on in the next week to 10 days. And this bill preserves the deduction for medical expenses, but it eliminates the requirement under the Affordable Care Act that everyone must carry health insurance. And according to the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office, this is going to result in 13 million Americans completely losing their health insurance over the next 10 years. And everyone else who buys their health insurance through their state exchange, well, they're going to be paying higher premiums. Now, once the Senate passes their version of the income tax bill, both of the bills will go to a conference committee, and the committee will negotiate their way to a single bill that will be supported in both the House and the Senate. And once that bill is passed, it becomes law. So we can see three possible outcomes for that final income tax bill. The final bill can eliminate the deduction for medical expenses that's currently part of the bill that's been passed in the House of Representatives. Or the final bill can preserve that deduction, but eliminate the requirement that everyone must carry health insurance under the Affordable Care Act, and that's currently part of the bill that's pending in the Senate. Or the final bill can eliminate the tax deduction for medical expenses and eliminate the requirement that everyone must carry health insurance. And any of these outcomes have the potential to be financially devastating to families living with MS. So now is the time for you to act. Call the U.S. Capitol Switchboard at area code 202-224-3121. That's area code 202-224-3121, and ask to speak with your congressional representative, and then ask to speak with your senators, and let them know that we can't live with these specific components of any new tax law. Your call can make a difference, so please take 2 minutes to speak up on your own behalf. I know we talked all about this in some detail last week, but this is too important and too potentially damaging to pass up and not get involved. So now is the time for all of us to be heard on this. But there are also a few other things that happened this past week. There was some good news from Canada this past week. Did you know that of all the countries in the world, Canada has the highest prevalence of multiple sclerosis? 1 in every 340 Canadians is living with MS, and every day, 3 more Canadians are diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. Last week, St. Michael's Hospital in Toronto announced that they're creating what they're describing as the world's leading treatment and research center for multiple sclerosis. Now, St. Michael's already has the largest MS treatment center in Canada, treating about 7,000 patients there. This new $30 million Barlow MS Center is scheduled to open in 2020. It's going to occupy about 25,000 square feet, taking up the entire top 2 floors of a new 17-story tower that's currently under construction. And the plan is for the center to not only offer patient-centered personalized care, but to also generate leading-edge MS research. Dr. Xavier Montalban, a world-class clinician and researcher from Spain, has been recruited to lead the center. And knowing Dr. Montalban, I consider this to be a sure sign that we can expect great things to be happening at the Barlow MS Center in Toronto. MMJ International Holdings, a medical cannabis research company, made a couple of announcements last week. They announced that they had applied for a patent on cannabis-based treatments for multiple sclerosis, and they also announced that Dr. Bianca Weinstock-Gutman, a professor of neurology at State University of New York at Buffalo and executive director of the New York State Multiple Sclerosis Consortium, will begin a phase 2 clinical trial designed to explore the therapeutic application of cannabis-based medicine in treating progressive MS. Now, other smaller studies have shown that cannabis-based medicines have been effective in treating MS pain and spasticity. MMJ Holdings is hoping to develop a prescription cannabis-based medicine in gel cap form, and this FDA-approved clinical trial is scheduled to begin next year and continue over the next 18 to 24 months. I guess you could say that the company has high hopes for the outcome of this study. Sorry, but I just couldn't resist. In recent years, a lot of MS research and a lot of other medical research has been focused on the role that gut bacteria plays in our lives. And just to clarify, gut bacteria refers to the complex community of microorganisms that live in our digestive tracts. Some initial studies have shown that gut bacteria can work as a protective element against MS, and other studies have shown that gut bacteria actually contributes to MS progression. So clearly, we have a lot to learn about gut bacteria. But what all of these studies seem to indicate is that regulating gut bacteria might represent a new type of treatment for MS. And with that in mind, researchers at New Jersey's Rutgers Robert Wood Johnson Medical School conducted a study using mice that had been genetically engineered to be predisposed to developing multiple sclerosis. And the team found that as long as the mice were kept in a sterile, bacteria-free environment, they didn't show any signs of MS. But once the mice were moved to a normal environment and exposed to the normal bacteria that you might find anywhere, they spontaneously developed the mouse version of multiple sclerosis. And it seemed that adolescent or young adult mice were more susceptible to MS than older mice, which might mean that mice develop a greater immunological tolerance as they age. And the gut bacteria imbalance in the young adult mice was shown to trigger pro-inflammatory signals and activated immune T cells, which further supports the role of gut bacteria in MS onset and MS progression. Now, the research team at Rutgers has won a grant from the National Institutes of Health to fund additional studies on the role of gut bacteria in MS. If you needed one more reason not to smoke, or to quit smoking if you've already started, we may have it for you. According to a study published in Sweden, researchers have shown that smoking is bad for MS, and MS makes the bad part of smoking even worse. Without getting too technical here, the researchers found that smoking changes a DNA mechanism that influences gene activity. And it seems that the more someone smokes, the worse the impact on this gene activity. They found that the number of cigarettes a person smokes actually increases the risk of that person developing MS. But they also discovered that smoking's effects on MS are reversible once a person quits. The research team found that while smoking a lot can have a significant negative impact on a smoker's gene activity, they saw that the effect was even worse, even stronger in MS patients. And this suggests that MS actually aggravates the negative effects of smoking. So if you're living with MS and you smoke, please stop. You could literally be making things worse for yourself. And if you don't smoke, well, this is one more really good reason not to start. One of the really interesting things that technology has given us is the ability to analyze very large chunks of data. And so-called big data applications are being used in almost every avenue of life today. So Dr. Maria Hutchins of Harvard's Brigham and Women's Hospital recently did some interesting data analysis of MS relapse rates among women before, during, and after their pregnancy. Dr. Hutchins used data from existing insurance claims to identify 274,000 women in the United States who had been diagnosed with MS and had experienced a pregnancy. And Dr. Hutchins analyzed these insurance claims beginning a year before their pregnancy, during their pregnancy, and then a year following their pregnancy. The data indicated that the large majority of these women identified in the study were between the ages of 25 and 39, which is the age range when most childbearing occurs in MS patients as well as the rest of the healthy population. Dr. Hutchins analyzed the data to show the rate of MS relapse per month as a percent, and she found that MS patients experienced a relapse rate of 1.47 in the 9 to 12 months prior to getting pregnant. Then, these patients experienced a sharp decline in their MS relapses during pregnancy. Postpartum, the rate of MS relapse begins to increase. In the year that follows their delivery, patients' relapse rates return to about what they were prior to getting pregnant. Dr. Hutchins also looked at the data in terms of how severe these relapses were and found that the majority of the MS relapses that did occur during pregnancy were mild. They didn't require treatment. They didn't require hospitalization. And as Dr. Hutchins reminds us, knowledge is power. And with the information she was able to derive from slicing and dicing all of this big data, she would advise women that their MS is very likely going to stabilize during their pregnancy, maybe even improve during the second and third trimesters of their pregnancy. And then it's going to be very important to pay attention to what may be happening in the 3 to 6 months following delivery. And this sort of insight can be incredibly helpful to women with MS who are trying to make a decision about breastfeeding, or perhaps deciding when is the right time to resume their MS drug medication. So this research is a really good example of something that may seem like an abstract deep dive into big data, but ends up providing really useful and actionable information that MS patients can take advantage of in making informed, real-world decisions. Well, that's going to wrap it up for this week's tour through the real world of MS news. I want to thank everyone who's taken the time to send me an email. I always appreciate your feedback and your suggestions. And I want to answer a question that I received from a number of you about last week's podcast episode. You know, last week's podcast was really dedicated to caregivers And I mentioned that I had spent about 10 years as my wife Jean's primary caregiver. It seems that a lot of you were wondering what her current status is, why I was no longer her caregiver. So Jean has a particularly aggressive flavor of progressive MS. And it had reached a point where, given her set of symptoms, which make up a really, really long list, she just couldn't be safely cared for at home any longer. And so I was forced to make the very difficult decision, but the very best decision given Jean's situation, to have her cared for full-time in a subacute nursing facility. And for some of you who may not be familiar with nursing facilities, there's skilled nursing, so-called nursing homes, and there are acute facilities, those are hospitals, and somewhere in between a skilled nursing facility and a hospital lies a subacute nursing facility. It's a bit more care and a bit more complex care than you would typically find at a skilled nursing facility, but it's not quite the same as a hospital. Now, when that happened, my role changed. Obviously, Jean was receiving excellent care around the clock, so I didn't need to be her caregiver. But what I did need to be was her medical advocate. And that's a role that everyone should understand, know about, and you got to have one of those around when you go to the hospital, when you visit the doctor's office, when you have your regular neurologist follow-up appointments. A medical advocate, someone who is a family member, a close friend, who can be there at those appointments and who can help facilitate the best possible care for someone living with MS. We're going to talk about what it means to be a medical advocate on behalf of someone else in a future podcast episode, because I think it is really, really important, and I can cite all the reasons that I've experienced as to why it's so important. But I also think it's something that isn't often talked about, and I know from dealing with other caregivers that it's not something that is as well known as it should be. So we're going to be talking about what it means to be a medical advocate and how important that role really is in a future podcast episode. If you'd like to share something with me, go to the website at realtalkms.com, go to the Contact Us page, and let me know what's on your mind. Don't forget, you can subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Google Play Music, or Stitcher. My name is John Strum. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you next time.